there are three kind of levels of teams, in my opinion. There are teams and groups that you impose something on. So you direct them. You said, these are our values. This is what it's going to be, and you have to police it. The next one is where it's shared. Guys, what do you think of this? This is what we're thinking. Yeah, that's good. And they have a little bit of input. The third level, which is rare, is where it's owned, where as a group, you come up with them. Okay, guys and girls, what do you want this team to be? Now, the difference is when you have ownership of something, now you're involved, you're invested in it.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will help you get better at teaching and leading so that you can develop high-performing teams and high-character people.
Coaches, welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Fergus Connolly. Fergus is one of the foremost performance and leadership development coaches. He has worked for some of the world's leading professional sports teams, special forces units, and Fortune 500 companies, like the San Francisco 49ers, Liverpool FC, New York Knicks, Google, Navy SEALs, Carolina Panthers, U.S. Special Forces, Verizon, and many others. He's also the author of multiple books, including Game Changer, The Art of Sports Science. In part 2 of this conversation, we talk about culture, establishing values, the 3 levels of teams, and sustaining success. If you enjoy the episode and want to grab a free copy of the podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode. And if you're interested in getting access to the coaching Zoom we held with Doug Lemov and Stu Singer a couple weeks ago on getting tactics, technique, and psychology to transfer, check out the link in the show details. And finally, if you're interested in learning more about what we offer coaches and organizations, go to cuttingedgecoach.com. Now to part 2 of my conversation with Fergus Connolly. Enjoy the episode.
Let's talk about it. You alluded to it with culture, that it's a buzzword, but what actually is it and how do we influence it? Tell us how you answer those questions.
Okay. So I'll use the simplest, fastest example. If you, let's say you go out for something to eat tonight, so you go to a restaurant. You take your loved one, your partner out. You go out to eat. Somebody meets you at the door. They bring you to your table, give you the menu, chat with you for a moment, tell you what's on the menu. You eat and you leave. So the following morning, I bump into you and go, "Hey, you went to this new restaurant. What's it like?" You're going to tell me. You're going to describe 2 things to me. You're going to describe, the food, which was the key thing that you went for, right? That's the nuts and bolts. But then you're going to describe the other thing you're going to throw in is how you were treated and what the environment was like. So artifacts and behaviors. So if you take a football team, and listen, I've visited hundreds of teams, worked with hundreds of teams at this stage, but if you go to any organization, there is the football or the basketball or the sport itself. And then if I start to ask you a little bit more about that team, then you tell me about 2 other things, generally artifacts and behaviors. Artifacts are basically how things appear. So let's go back to the restaurant example. Food was great, but the layout was a little bit awkward. Tables were too close together. Or some of the cutlery actually wasn't clean. Or you might tell me food was great and the actual atmosphere and just the design was beautiful. And the second thing then is behavior. Great meal, beautiful restaurant, but the people were a little bit rude or they weren't so nice. Those are the 3 things that that are culture. Now that's on a surface level. So when you go to a team, or if I'm consulting or working with a team, I will, you automatically look at how it's laid out and then how people interact with you and with others. So that's like, if you think of it like an iceberg, that's on the top, that's the bit you see. But underneath that then if you work backwards, it's all down to attitude, and then underneath that are the values. So the values that the organization have determine your attitude to work, to people, to the environment. But at the most base level, you want a shared set of values. Now, I'm not saying you need to sit down in a classroom and organize them, but you've got this like group of values. And then, and this is an important point. Everybody comes in, let's say I took a random group of people together and I was going to start a group or an organization. Everybody comes in with different belief structures. Like they've all, different faiths, different whatever. So the belief structure is different in any team, but the values should be common. And that's how, because, this was something, it was a big challenge for me working in different countries, different sports. I had to figure out how do you pull people together, but allow them their individual right to be different, think different. Okay, then you have to identify what the values are and align on values and respect the fact that everybody is entitled to think something different, believe something different, but you can find alignment on values, and that's the bit. So it never should come down to I want you to believe something different, but these are the values that you believe in, that we all believe in. Yes, okay, well then let's work on these values. That's how we're going to move forward.
That's so good, and I want to talk about more. I want to talk about that more because I think that is just a critical piece of what we should be doing as coaches or leaders of a team or organization. Like you said, you've worked with a ton of teams. Like, how do those coaches do that piece? How do they establish these shared values that aren't just slogans on the wall, right? But actually bring those shared values to life?
Great question. So there's actually a really interesting article written. I can send you the link if some of your listeners want it. And the other thing I can do is in the book Game Changer, I go through culture, not trying to sell a book, but there is a big section on that. But I can send you a graphic that you can share with your listeners as well that explains it. But when if I go to a team, go to an organization, and this is the same in business. Like, there are business leaders that I work with. It's the very same thing. When you go to a team, you generally find coaches who are very scheme, sport focused, or very culture focused. So that's the first thing. Some coaches really don't spend a lot of time. They just focus on the game and are not overly worried about culture. But those coaches who manage the culture well and have some kind of awareness, they represent it. That's the first thing. They do their best to reflect on it themselves and represent what that culture means. And they demonstrate clearly, okay, these are the few key values that are important to us. I'll give you an example. At Google have what they talk about, the 3 respects. I didn't know this. It was one of my clients who works there. They were telling me, okay, the 3 respects are, respect the opportunity, respect the customer, and essentially respect yourself. That's what the 3 come down to. So, you've got this opportunity to make a difference. You've got a consumer, and you've got these 3 different things. And what you really want is you want something that's simple, that everybody can agree on, and you can discuss it as a group and say, okay, this is what we represent, and this is what's important to us. Why it's important is you can't legislate and can't explain to every kid that works with you or every coach that works with you, exactly the right decision to make in every situation, because you just can't go through every decision. But if they understand clearly what the 2 or 3 key values are, they can always ask themselves, okay, am I adhering to these values? Okay, that's going to inform the decision I make. And one other thing that I think is important, there are 3 kind of levels of teams, in my opinion. There are teams and groups that you impose something on. So you direct them. You said, these are our values. This is what it's going to be, and you have to police it. The next one is where it's shared. Guys, what do you think of this? This is what we're thinking. Yeah, that's good. And they have a little bit of input. The third level, which is rare, is where it's owned, where as a group, you come up with them. Okay, guys and girls, what do you want this team to be? Now, the difference is when you have ownership of something, now you're involved, you're invested in it. There's no joke about an Irish breakfast. Have you been to Ireland, Luke? You haven't been to Ireland. Okay. If you go to Ireland, there's an Irish breakfast consists of 2 eggs, sausage, bacon. There's a black and white pudding, which is basically like meat it's actually cooked in blood. It tastes delicious. Sounds worse than it is, but it's essentially a heart attack on a plate. But the joke goes that when you look at this plate, the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. So the chicken just gave you eggs, but the pig, it's been committed. It's committed. And so when you work with teams, you get lots of people who are, like the chicken or the hen, they're involved, but you really want to get to a stage where people are committed. And the way to do that is to give them ownership of the values. It has to come from the organization or from, the team as a whole. And what happens is because they're involved, because they're committed and because they have ownership, they will start to police it themselves. And that's when you get to that level in an organization, that becomes special.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a topic that several other people that I've talked with have brought up too, is the importance of ownership, that people feeling like they own it, that they created it. So I'm really curious, how have some of the teams that you've worked with that have done this really well, done that? How have they given ownership of these values to the athletes, to the team, or to the other coaches, the entire group? How does that actually happen and play out?
The simple, the one word answer is listening. But what I really mean is that you have conversations that are more open. So, some of the best teams I've worked with, the conversations have been, guys, this is how we're going to approach it. This is why. That's how it starts initially, because you have to start somewhere. And does this make sense? Are there any thoughts on it? How do you think? And you listen to criticisms or what you might appear as criticisms or inputs. You ask, you welcome them, you have conversations. And it's not about just speaking. It's not about that. It's about them recognizing that you take their input, you listen. You might adjust something because some people have some great ideas. Initially, maybe yes, maybe no. But as it evolves more and more, the fact that people see that you are open to ideas, open to thoughts, people are more willing then to come forward and start to give input. So it transitions across into ownership. It's difficult to start just with ownership because you do have to align, what the vision is. And, then you can start to transition across. What's really interesting as well, though, it's important that one other point, if you're working with a team that is successful, for example, or has been reasonably successful for, let's say, 5 years, you do have to, over time, refresh those values to start from scratch again. Start with a blank slate and go, guys, we're going to start again. And you've got, again, at this stage, a really smart group of people. But it's important that you never get to the stage that values and culture is just inherited alone. It has to be refreshed because sometimes, a laziness comes in. People join the team or come in, they just inherit, they remember, they can, regurgitate values, but they don't have ownership, and that's an important point.
I think that's a really good point. And I think maybe one that can get overlooked, like you were talking about there with, if you're having success and maybe even sustaining some success, it's easy to rest on your laurels or just continue to do what had been working. But I think that you make a great point there that's when things can go wrong, is when we neglect to do that. So I'd love to know your other thoughts on sustaining success. I think that's a key piece of it, what you just shared, that refreshing values and culture. What else have the teams and coaches that you've been around done to sustain success?
Yeah. So, and actually that example of just inheriting a culture, that was something that, that I learned working with a special operations group, which was starting to struggle. From the outside, a great culture, but internally, it just got to a stage where it was being inherited, and some great guys, but there wasn't true ownership, which is ironic because they did have it, but not saying complacency, it just crept in unbeknownst. In terms of sustaining success, if you look at most organizations now, or in any walk of life, we're very, very good at teaching people what I refer to as the hard skills, like the core knowledge, and then you start working and you get experience. We're very, very good at that. That's not the area. I never taught Colin Kaepernick how to throw a football, you know what I mean, or Frank Gore how to run. The experts, it's about recognizing that people are experts in their area. You need to look beyond that. So that's where the amplifiers come in the professional setting. Those are the things that are going to continue to sustain success. So there are three areas that I work on, particularly focused on sustaining success. In the professional sense, in your sport or in your area, the hard skills, generally you will continue to learn them. But the area that I focus on there are, what are these other amplifier skills that are limiting factors for you that we can help improve, that amplify again, that allow you to continue to have impact with those hard skills. The other area then is in personal, you as a person, in terms of your health and your lifestyle, your mental model for life, like how you look after yourself, which impacts you and your family beyond, so if you have a good handle on that, you're going to come to work in a contented state of mind and then be able to impact coaching. You can get away with it for a period of time, and everybody does early on in their life, the sacrifice, a little bit of sleep here and there, or a lot of sleep or whatever, but it will definitely impact over time. So there's the personal. And the third area then is in terms of purpose. Like what is the driving purpose? What are your values? What is it that continues your motivation? And so those are the three areas: professional, personal, and purposeful. And then helping people continue to, that's the bit. So if you look at the trajectory of a good coach early on in their career, they learn the knowledge, the hard skills, they become very knowledgeable. They'll pick up some of the soft skills they need, but then at a certain point they start to plateau. It's not the game. There's a few small things, yes, but that's not the sticking point. It's usually people skills, communication, resilience, critical thinking. Those are the skills that are going to keep you on an upward trajectory, or it's going to be managing your personal life, or in some cases, it's okay. You see some coaches get a crisis of conscience, so to speak, where it's about like, what's their true motivation and value system here.
I love those three areas. And you talked about first, that professional, those hard skills, that, the technical, tactical, that, most coaches that, that's where they're strong in, or that's kind of where they go on that journey on early in their career. And you talked about, are there other amplifiers that are limiting you in that area? So, and this was just essentially just a curious follow-up question I had to that. When you said that, are you talking about, like, for example, this coach has great technical, tactical knowledge, but he really struggles to communicate, and that's limiting him there? Is that one of the things you're maybe talking about in that area?
Yeah, exactly. Or you can have, like, I've worked with some incredibly smart coaches, former NFL head coaches, exceptionally bright, very knowledgeable ESPN contributors, but perhaps struggle to build a community and a team around them that can support him and allow him to be truly great as a coach. So it's not his knowledge, it's not his experience either. It's something else that's limiting that. And and this came about. Again, how did I come to this? When we would give players a day off, a lot of them might come in on their off day they'd just come in and do some extra work. Well, I could almost tell you to a man what they wanted to work on. They were going to come in, if the guy loved lifting weights and if he was strong, he'd come in and lift weights. If the guy was fast, he'd come in and wanted to do speed work. People very rarely worked on the things that were their weaknesses, And so it's the same with coaches. If they have a day off, they're going to go and watch film, perhaps, rather than take the time and go, I can make a 10% difference working in another area, and I might make a 1% difference here, which is actually going to have the bigger impact. And so it's but the challenge is it's difficult and it's uncomfortable to do something you're not good at, or to step outside of your comfort zone and go and learn about something that subconsciously I need to work on it. Man, it's going to be uncomfortable, or I have to listen to somebody who speaks differently or a different language, or thinks differently to teach me this other skill. And that's going to be a challenge for me. But those are the areas, the ability to communicate, a different perspectives on critical thinking. What are the biases I have? We all have them. Do we tend to believe this particular approach? Do I have a bias towards people who have only been successful, or do you have a bias like the halo effect? It's people who present the idea better. Those are the ones I'm drawn to. And so taking the time out to spend time working through critical thinking, problem solving strategies, and just being exposed to them. And the approach I use is I don't actually speak to or coach actually much at all in sporting examples. I don't use sporting examples for a lot of coaches. They try and use random examples outside the box because that's not threatening to them. And it's far more enjoyable and entertaining. And what you see a light bulb go off and go, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Wow. Oh, actually, I'm making that very same mistake in sport, in my job. And that's when it becomes fun,
Yeah, that's really good. I think that's powerful too. Those light bulb moments, and I think it's such a important point that you shared there. We default to reinforcing the things that we already are strong in. And that's not how we really grow, because we're not stretching ourselves in that place. You're in your comfort zone, and we know that the growth happens when you get outside of that comfort zone. But again, it's uncomfortable to do, right? And so most of us, myself included, we try to avoid it, right? So I think that's such an important thing to talk about. Maybe kind of wrapping it up here, and this ties back to something we talked about a little bit earlier. You talked about the importance of the head coach or the leader representing the culture. Will you talk more about that? Why is it so important? And maybe, I don't know if you have examples, or what comes to mind when you think about, a coach that really, he represented the culture and the impact of that on this team.
So as a coach, and this was something I learned from a professor and very, very, a mentor to a lot of very successful soccer coaches in Portugal years ago. He spoke about the 3-year rule, and the example he gave, which is anecdotal. I know who he's talking about, but I won't mention him. The example he gave was, you come to a team, you are successful and you've been successful. So you come to a team, you have a system in place, you start to put it into practice, and everybody believes in you. And you make promises, we do this, we're going to be successful. Everybody's enthusiastic, and you get this honeymoon effect, right? And at the end of the year, you may or may not have been successful, who knows? But perhaps you haven't been genuine and honest, and you haven't been, You have presented something, but you've perhaps not lived up to it. So at the end of that year, people are going to go, you stand in front of them again, start a second year, and again, it's a great, enthusiastic, and people are going, I have a little bit of doubt here because, he said some things and he said he was going to do this and he didn't. But you know what? I'll give him the benefit for another year. We've been doing okay. And again, we go again. But now this little bit of honesty and trust has started to creep in, or dishonesty and distrust to start to creep in. And then you get to the end of by the time you get to the end of the third year, if you have not been authentic, genuine, and honest with people, you've lost their trust. And that's when things start to crumble. That's a really simple example. But notice when I use the word authentic, what I mean by authentic is, I mean, being genuine. I'm not saying that you have to be, and I got to be careful how I say this, to be an effective leader. There are effective leaders who are not good people. So, being a good leader, being a good coach, being an effective coach are not the same thing. But by being authentic and being genuine, people know where they stand and they can trust you, even if they know that you're not necessarily a good person. So people say, oh, well, only good coaches win, or only good people win. No, they don't. No, there's lots of bad people who have been successful. But if you truly want to sustain it, you want to be good and you want to be effective. But to be an effective coach, people need to know where they stand. There's lots of people who have worked for, whether it's CEOs or played for coaches who perhaps they didn't like, but they knew where they stood with them. And so they could manage it and it was clear. There was no ambiguity. I wouldn't go for a beer with this guy, or I wouldn't go and hang out with him. But I know where I stand. And so I'm clear with that, and I can justify it. I can rationalize. I'm going to come. I'm going to go to work. I know what's happening here. That's more important actually than being somebody who's being dishonest, who from a player's perspective. So it's important to be authentic with yourself, and obviously be a good person. But from a player's perspective, they want honesty first of all, and then they can choose whether they want to play for you or follow you or not. But that's the important bit. If you're dishonest, you create distrust. Patrick Lencioni's, 5 dysfunctions of the team. It starts with trust at the foundation. I would argue honesty and authenticity is actually the foundation. Be honest, be authentic, and be genuine. And that's important as well, because as a coach, if you put a game plan in place or strategy in place and you lose, well, the next day you've got to go in and be honest and go, guys, I got it wrong. You did exactly what I told you, but I got it wrong. That's being honest. That's building. The alternative is you come in, you blame the weather, blame umpires, blame whatever. You're going to burn through honesty quickly, and that's the foundation that trust is going to crumble on.
That's so good. I love the way you frame that, as far as, there are plenty of effective coaches that aren't good people. The goal is to be both, right? To be authentic, to be a good person, and also an effective coach. Because like you said, the reality is, like, there's a lot of not so great people that have won and been successful in that sense of coaching. And so I think it's just so important. It's like, let's go for both of them, and the importance of being authentic in that, showing up. Like you said, like, players want to know what to expect, where they stand with you, how you're going to show up is just so important. Well, this has been awesome. Fergus, before we hop off, would love if you just shared with listeners where they can connect with you and get access to what you offer and what you do.
Twitter, I guess, or my website, fergusconnolly.com is probably the easiest. I'm terrible at the whole social media thing. I just love doing just love coaching and helping people. So if I can help anyone, more than happy to. I'll send you the graphic on culture, that you can share with anyone who wants to reach out.
That'd be awesome. Thanks, Fergus. I appreciate your time a ton.
Luke, thank you for having me.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and thanks to Fergus for joining me. As always, if you enjoyed the episode and you want to grab a copy of the podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast. I've got 2 key takeaways from this episode. Number 1 is the 3 levels of a team that Fergus discussed: imposed, shared, and owned. I think we all probably want a team where everyone feels a sense of ownership, but to do that, we actually have to give them the opportunity to co-create it and own it with us. If we want deep commitment, we have to allow them to own it. And like Fergus said, when they feel a sense of ownership, that's when they start to police themselves or hold each other accountable, which again is something I think we all want as coaches, a player-led team. And number 2 is the 3 areas of growth Fergus discussed: professional, personal, and purpose. It's so important to take an honest, reflective look at all those areas and then be intentional about growing in each of them. Like he mentioned, if you're in an unhealthy state in one of those areas, eventually it will catch up to you and prevent you from reaching your potential as a coach, and I believe prevent your team from reaching theirs. Like I mentioned in the intro, if you want to learn more about how we serve coaches and organizations, go to cuttingedgecoach.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, would you take a minute to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and/or give us a shout out on Twitter? It goes a long way in helping us share with other coaches. Thanks for listening to the podcast.